Greetings and welcome to another impressions video here at Words About Games, and today we're going to be looking at Days Gone. Days Gone is a post-apocalyptic open-world survival horror game set in Oregon in the United States following a viral outbreak that turned most of humanity into freakers, not zombies. Players take on the role of Deacon St. John, a former member of a motorcycle gang 2 years after the initial outbreak. Deacon and his best friend Boozer are attempting to survive out in what is lovingly referred to as the shit, as Deacon tries to reconcile with the apparent death of his wife Sarah, who was stabbed during the initial outbreak and loaded onto a helicopter and taken to a camp that was subsequently overrun by freakers. In a lot of ways, Days Gone is very familiar. It's a problem that any game about zombies is gonna have to face. There have been so many games, movies, TV shows, comic books, and more about the zombie apocalypse that it can feel like we've been here before. And this is pretty much the case for Days Gone, at least narratively. Don't get me wrong, there are some pretty good story beats. The production values that Sony Bend have brought to bear in the game are fantastic. In cutscenes, Sam Witwer delivers an incredibly strong performance as protagonist Deacon St. John, as does Courtney Draper as Deacon's wife. While the story will feel familiar to anyone who has even a passing interest in zombie fiction, it's at least well told and provides enough of a hook to keep you invested in the action during the opening act of the game. Elsewhere, Days Gone does show flashes of brilliance, particularly in the world of Oregon that has been lovingly recreated as a post-apocalyptic playground. When the game behaves, it's a pretty stunning world to cruise around on the back of your trusty motorbike. The setting of Days Gone sits in stark contrast to many post-apocalyptic games thanks to its focus on the lush forests and mountains of Oregon as opposed to the urban devastation that's usually prevalent in stories like this. There are even times when you're cruising down the highway through a particularly scenic part of the world that it's easy to forget that this is a world that has collapsed. When you do forget, the marauding bands of freakers will help remind you. The swarms, which was the first thing Sony ever showed of Days Gone back in 2016, are one of the better parts of the game. You'll never feel wholly safe or comfortable in Days Gone thanks to the massive packs of freakers you can accidentally bump into while you're wandering around the world. Turning a corner and coming face to face with a huge swarm is a panic-inducing moment, as is clearing out a bandit camp and having a swarm, attracted by the commotion, suddenly descend and turn things nasty pretty quickly. The number of freakers you can suddenly find yourself dealing with mean quick thinking and always having an escape plan ready are the first order of business, which makes it a shame that once the initial shock and adrenaline of those first swarm encounters wears off, they actually become one of the more annoying parts of the game. Fighting a swarm is specifically an end game activity, unlocked as a reward for pushing through the 30 to 40 hour campaign. In the early game, running and or hiding is all you can do when faced with more than a handful of freakers. And that's a big problem for Days Gone, because aside from the core narrative, the rest of the game simply doesn't hold up very well once you've effectively removed the one element that should have set it apart. The controls, whether you're engaged in combat or riding your bike, feel sluggish and imprecise. Gunplay is awkward, and it often feels like you're not really hitting wherever you're aiming. This isn't such a problem when you're firing an assault rifle into a 200-strong horde of freakers, but becomes a fairly major concern when you're clearing away a dozen human enemies or a small handful of freakers in a nest, which is what you'll spend the majority of your time doing. The bike, your main mode of transportation, similarly feels sluggish and unresponsive when you're riding it. It turns out both of these things can be remedied by purchasing skills or upgrades. They don't completely fix how awkward the controls feel, however, and hiding more satisfying controls behind potentially hours of play seems like a great way to make a lousy first impression. The world itself is wholly unrewarding, with the compelling narrative threads buried under mountains of generic open-world busywork that simply makes it feel like you're spending much of your time in Days Gone playing through content designed to pad out the experience or justify the expansive open world. There are plenty of freaking nests to burn down, Nero checkpoints to reactivate, bandit camps to clear out, and much more, but it's painfully generic and incredibly repetitive, and without the compelling gameplay of something like Spider-Man, it simply grates the more you end up doing it. And layered on top of these frustrations is a set of survival and progression mechanics that seem to exist purely to stifle and hold back anyone playing. You'll search every nook, cranny, and dead body for the junk you need to make bandages and Molotov cocktails, but the amount of crafting materials you can hold is pitifully small, which is the worst of both worlds. You'll constantly be drowning in rags or bottles when you're full up, but also constantly out of critical supplies when you need them the most. The final coup de grace on my enjoyment of the game came from the myriad of technical issues I faced while trying simply to play it. A stuttering frame rate will be as constant a companion on your journey as your bike, with everything from driving to combat and even cutscenes seeing the frames tank at regular intervals. Enemy AI is hopeless, which works well for the mindless freakers, but less so for the supposedly intelligent humans. There's also a really nasty audio bug that cropped up for me a few times during my playthrough that sees random audio elements just disappear from the game altogether. Sometimes enemies or my bike would be silent while the rest of the game's audio played out. Depending on what audio you lose, the game potentially becomes effectively unplayable, and this isn't a rare bug, at least not from my experience. There's a potentially great game buried somewhere in Days Gone. All of the pieces are here: the compelling narrative, excellent production values, strikingly distinctive world, and huge freaker hordes all show a game with a lot of promise. That promise is wasted, however, thanks to sloppy controls, a painfully dull and repetitive gameplay loop, and a huge over-reliance on pointless open-world filler, all of which is compounded by some pretty glaring technical issues. Having said all of this, I do hope Ben gets another crack at Days Gone, because the potential for a great game is here. It's just not something that's realised this time around. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you've enjoyed it, please leave us a comment, like, or subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We've got tons of awesome videos coming every week, including review impressions, indie game of the week, debate-driven top 5 lists, video essays, and our weekly podcast where we discuss games, gaming culture, and the games industry. We also stream 3 times a week at twitch.tv/wordsaboutgames. But most importantly, have a fantastic day.